I like books that can touch the very depth of a reader's soul. To me, it's very important that the novel's ending is unpredictable, as even the slightest hint about how the ending might unfold can completely discourage me from reading. One of my teachers, who is familiar with this peculiarity of mine, suggested that I read Bas, a novel written by Rakhymzhan Otarbayev. And yes, this book captured me from the very first lines. I could not stop reading it. It felt as if I was in a completely different world. Do you want to know why? Aynur Toleo, poet and a literary critic, Master of Humanities and Literature Studies, laureate of the Makhambet Otemisuly Special Prize, winner of the Republican Poetry Competition dedicated to the 175th birth anniversary of Abay. Heroes that are genuinely unique and truly remarkable for their era are usually born in the works of authors of remarkable personalities. The modern Kazakh reader has definitely matured to be exposed to such heroes. Have there been individuals in the history of our country who would take care of their people? Or is the outdated image of oppressed Kazakh stuck in the role of a villain still relevant? While I was reading this novel, I experienced all sorts of contradicting thoughts. Yes, this book makes you think seriously, and it's not an easy read. This is definitely not a book one would consider when they want to relax or entertain themselves. Moreover, particularly because of this book, I am sure about the future of Kazakh literature. I am sure that modern Kazakh literature is something that can make projections for the future, that it is something that is way ahead of its time, something that has great prospects. And Otarbayev, an author who valued creativity above all else, is indeed a unique writer who, among other things, was distinguished by his intelligence and unprecedented wisdom. Rakhymzhan Otarbayev was a writer and playwright. He was born on October 19, 1956 in Kurmangazy district of Atyrau region. Rakhymzhan graduated from Oral Pedagogical Institute in 1977. He then began his career as a correspondent for a regional newspaper. Otarbayev was awarded the Honoured Worker of Kazakhstan title. He was an academician of the International Chingiz Aitmatov Academy, a holder of the Parasat order, a laureate of the Makhambet Republican Prize, and a presidential scholarship fellow. The author's works are popular not only in our country but also abroad. His selected works have been translated into Russian, Kyrgyz, Chinese, Arabic, Turkish, and English. The English classic Charles Dickens is known to us as a genius writer. A huge layer in the development of British literature is associated with his name. And it is with him that I can compare the hero of today's program, a representative of our era, talented prose writer and playwright Rakhymzhan Otarbayev, someone who will always be remembered for his devotion to human spirituality. His novel Bas is a work that is able to convey the signs of our time to the future generations. Time is fleeing, but fortunately, we have something to replenish our spiritual heritage with. One of the most famous works of Rakhymzhan Otarbayev is his novel Bas, which describes a real historical event in a grotesque fantasy form. The famous akyn and batyr of the Kazakh people, Makhambet Otemisuly, fell victim to internecine and political strife in a steppe at the end of the 19th century. The freedom fighter was killed, beheaded by traitors, and his head was later buried next to his body. Back in Soviet times, the body was exhumed. Scientists wanted to restore the appearance of the hero, but an incident happened. It was not possible to return the hero's head back to the grave due to some kind of bureaucracy. It happened right during the perestroika period, and only in 1993, the skull of Makhambet was reburied with his remains. As the title of the novel suggests, the plot of the book is built around the situation with Makhambet's skull. According to the author, there were times when people became toys in the hands of others, and these times have passed. The novel can be divided in two large parts. The first describes the events in which the main characters renounce the skull. The second part revolves around the search for that very skull. And here quite natural questions arise. Why did the protagonists abandon the skull in the first place? And what made them suddenly start looking for it? Finding the answer to the last question is pretty easy. A solid reward was promised for the head of Makhambet. Greedy and cynical people decided to find the hero's head by all means. No one wanted the skull of a valiant warrior without getting a proper reward for it. And it's heartbreaking to read about it. Voicing the bitter truth, the writer emphasized how society did not value its heroes. And here is an interesting fact about the novel. As it turned out, the author burned the first manuscript of the book. After about a year, he studied the archives of Moscow, Omsk, Astrakhan, and eventually gathered a large amount of information. Then, after a long deliberation, the writer returned to the topic and wrote the version of the novel that we all can read now. Surprisingly, all the novel's characters are very familiar to me. I'm sure you will recognize them too. Times change, centuries fly, but vile people never cease to exist. They persevere and never change, outside or inside. When I was reading the book, I was amazed at how skillfully the author was able to capture and convey the spirit of the times we live in. The conflict of characters in Otarbayev's novel is a dispute and confrontation between people of the modern era, people of our time. The resonant work was vetoed, but the Atyrau regional Kazakh drama theater named after Makhambet still presented the play based on the novel to their audience. After the success of the show, the play became popular in other theaters too.
Gördüңдер ме? Маңдайы тайқылауда, жазық біткен. Демек, жіңішке сүйек кісі болмаған сірә. Бас бітімі, шықшыты соны дәлелдеп тұр. Өлтірерде 3 рет қылышпен шапқан. Екеуі жерге тұсқа тигенде, ал біреуі оң жақ шекелікке қағыс тиген. Бас сүйек ойылған. Демек, ақынның ажалы 2 адамнан келген. Қылыштың біреуі өткірді, екіншісінің жүзі тобылды. Міне, көрдіңдер ме? Міне!
The writer was 5 years old when his mother Shamsia drowned. The grievances of his early years and his orphanhood left Rakhymzhan Otarbayev scarred. Once experienced this pain, he had always looked at life differently. Motives of loneliness are very prominent in his works. In his novel Bas, loneliness is the primary background to the story from the very beginning, a lonely yurt that stands in a deserted steppe. This is the house of Makhambet, one of the outstanding batyrs of Kazakh people. Makhambet's yurt was there, like the grave of a shaman, located in a deserted place in the middle of the steppe, with its shanarak covered. The restless wind did not subside, and the side curtain of the yurt, Tuyruluk, had to be closed. Noel, a scientist from Moscow who found Makhambet's skull, is lonely too. 2 heroes with similar fates, both misunderstood and rejected by their contemporaries. But we're not Makhambet's contemporaries. So, how much do we understand the prominent akyn? Aren't we stuck in the routine of everyday life? And what is the difference between the contemporaries of Makhambet and today's Rakhymzhan's readers? This was the question that worried the author the most. We can be sure of one thing: Rakhymzhan is the atom of our society. Nobody can divide him into particles anymore, even if one tries very hard. In the words of Democritus, Rakhymzhan is eternal, he's in constant motion. Sharkhan Kazakul, publicist. As a writer, Rakhymzhan is eloquent. There is nothing superfluous in his texts. The novel contains many idioms, proverbs, and sayings that reflect the national culture. Moreover, there are some rare phrases that you will never find in other authors' works. Artistic thinking and elegant solutions that are intrinsic to all Otarbayev's work. For example, in the writer's perception, a setting sun is alive. It crawled on its knees and fell to the west. When the author describes a man sitting with his legs crossed, he used these words: He sat down so that his two legs embraced each other. It is these phrases that breathe in the artistry into his texts, and this is apparently a distinctive feature of the writer, his very unique style. Buzz is a socio-psychological novel based on a fantastic plot featuring reincarnations. For example, at midnight, Makhambet's skull begins to talk. Therefore, the plot of the book is called adventurous. But this approach does not in the least detract from the true realism of the work. There is a tendency intrinsic to Kazakh literature. Authors experiment with fantastic and fantasy motives in serious books. For example, the mysterious book by Maksat Malikov is a work written entirely in the fantasy genre. And in the book The Beggar's Billionaire Friend by Kanagat Abul Khair, published at the end of the 2020, social themes are combined with adventures. In this work, you can find characters who deliver air to Mars. The writer Jibek Mubarak can be called a master of the fantasy genre, as he's very skillful in combining antiquity and modern worldview in his works. Books with mystical stories are in demand among readers. Now let's return to Rakhymzhan Otarbayev. The writer believed in a bright future and convinced his protagonist Noel of the existence of some bright prospects. Two young characters, Daurian and Nayim, embody hope and faith. And it is to them Noel leaves the skull of Makhambet. The main character no longer trusts adults, but still retains faith in the young. After all, they are the cornerstone of the country. This is how the novel depicts the clash of worldviews of the past and the future. Throughout the entire work, we witness a conflict of interests and opposition of views that keeps suspense alive for the reader. In the work of Rakhymzhan Otarbayev, the main conflict is the dispute between the old and the new, between science and obscurantism, ignorance and talent. I admire the author's position. He had a great understanding of what he was writing about. In his light and free manner of writing, one can sense how much he was inspired by the topic. Writers who are capable of describing the society in such an artistic and realistic manner will never disappoint their readers. The novel Buzz is valuable for its enduring relevance. After all, even today, many consider wealth rather than education to be a virtue. Perhaps time will pass, values will change, and then the characters of the book that we find so familiar will become different. Who knows? We can only hope that Otarbayev's work, full of melancholy and yet hopeful, will be welcomed and understood by the coming generation. Rakhymzhan is the Kazakh Chekhov of modern times of the 21st century, I would say. Rakhymzhan is a very skillful, thoughtful, and sincere writer. He's a master in the genre of storytelling, which requires, above all, virtuosity and artistic talent. Abdujamil Nurpiisov, writer. Speaking of Chekhov, Rakhymzhan Otarbayev also penned short stories. For readers who prefer short stories to voluminous novels, I would recommend the following writers' works: Mona Lisa, Actress, Hide and Seek, America's National Wealth, Atyrau Almaty Train. Above all, Rakhymzhan was a playwright who left an indelible mark in the theatrical art, brought time and space that are familiar to us on the stage of the theater. His plays have been staged in many theaters around the world. He is known not only in the East, but also in the West. For a quarter of a century, his plays have lived on the stages of Kyrgyz theaters, and Chingiz Aitmatov himself once said, "When opening a new theater, don't stage My Jamila, but please do stage Rakhymzhan Otarbayev's play." This was a real recognition of the talent and skills of the Kazakh writer. Indeed, it's because of Rakhymzhan Otarbayev that Kazakh literature has tapped into a new source, starting a new trend. And we can safely say that thanks to Rakhymzhan's outstanding talent, many amazing works that can compete with international masterpieces have appeared.